Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a fresh story to share, so let's dive right in. I first met my wife when we were both working in the same office about 8 years ago. I was new to town, having just relocated to a brand new city for my job. She was working as a receptionist at the time. When she gave me a tour of the office, we immediately hit it off. It took me a few weeks to gather enough courage to ask her out, but when I finally did, she said yes. We've been together ever since. A few years down the road, we got married, and it felt like living in a dream. Everything seemed perfect. We were happy, thriving in our careers, and madly in love. Before we tied the knot, we had a serious conversation about starting a family. We both wanted kids, but decided to wait for the right time. We saw having children too early in our 20s as possibly giving up our freedom, so we made the most of that time. We traveled, we went skydiving, and we enjoyed life without having to worry about anything else. As the years passed, I started feeling ready to settle down and start a family. But it was becoming clear that my wife still wanted to continue the jet-setting, adventurous lifestyle we had been enjoying. This difference in what we both wanted led to several arguments. It felt like we were living in two different worlds. During one of those heated arguments, I ended up giving her an ultimatum, telling her that if she didn't want to have children, I might have to leave. I know it was a pretty harsh thing to say, but I had always been upfront about wanting kids. She opened up to me, sharing her fears and saying she wanted to be a mom, but wasn't sure when. That conversation gave me some hope, so I stuck around. About a year passed, and bringing up the subject of children had become a sensitive topic, so I tried to avoid it. Meanwhile, my wife was still going out on weekends with her friends to bars and clubs, while I was at home, recovering from a long work week. I began noticing she was going out more frequently and staying out later, even during weeknights. When I asked her about it, she said her friends had found a new happy hour spot they enjoyed. One night, I was at home watching a nature documentary while my wife was supposedly at happy hour with some friends. One of those friends happened to be our next-door neighbor, someone we were pretty close with. This neighbor and her husband were often over at our place, and we'd hang out with them regularly. The doorbell rang, and when I answered, it was our neighbor. She explained her car wouldn't start, and since her husband wasn't home yet, she asked me if I could help jumpstart it. I agreed and walked over to her house with her. On the way, I asked her why she wasn't at happy hour with my wife, and she seemed confused. She said my wife had told her the happy hour was canceled. That immediately raised some red flags for me. Our neighbors were some of our closest friends, so it didn't make sense why my wife would lie to her and cancel plans without a good reason. As we continued talking, the neighbor mentioned how disappointed she was about the cancellation, especially since her husband had been working late a lot lately. At that point, I started feeling suspicious. Maybe it was just paranoia, or maybe I was beginning to put together pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed, but I started wondering if something was going on between my wife and someone else, perhaps even our neighbor. When my wife came home that night, I asked her directly. She responded by saying I was being ridiculous for even thinking she could be cheating on me, especially with our neighbor. She went on to explain that she canceled the happy hour because there had been some tension between our neighbor and one of her friends, and they felt uncomfortable with her being there. At the time, I believed her. But looking back, it just didn't sit right with me. Our neighbor was one of the kindest, sweetest people, and I couldn't figure out how she could have rubbed anyone the wrong way like that. As our marital issues continued, our intimacy suffered. We both had a lot of resentment built up toward one another, and we weren't communicating in a healthy way. It felt like we were growing further apart. Then, one night, I came home from work and was surprised when my wife seemed eager to be intimate with me. It had been a while, so I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just happy to reconnect. About a week later, I walked in after work to find her waiting for me in the living room, holding a pregnancy test. I was over the moon with excitement. I couldn't believe I was finally going to be a dad. Never in a million years did I imagine that the child wasn't mine. She wasn't going out as much because of the pregnancy, but she still spent plenty of time away from home, and it felt like she was avoiding me, even when I thought we should be spending more time together during such an important phase. Something that crosses my mind now, but I didn't give much thought to at the time, is how my wife never wanted me to come along to her ultrasound appointments. She'd always tell me they weren't anything important, but I really wanted to see our little baby on the monitor. Eventually, I convinced her to let me tag along to one of the appointments. While we were there, the doctor showed us the baby on the screen, and I was so moved, I almost cried. Out of curiosity, I asked if they had an estimated conception date. My wife quickly jumped in and brushed it off, saying they wouldn't really know, but the doctor mentioned that they could give a rough estimate, usually within about a week of the actual date. When I got the estimated time frame, I didn't think much of it at first, but later on, when I had some time to reflect, I realized something didn't add up. During the time frame the doctor gave us, my wife and I hadn't been intimate for months. We had been together once during that period, and just a week after that, she told me she was pregnant. I did some research online to see if a pregnancy test would show positive that quickly, and from what I found, it seemed pretty rare. It's uncommon for a woman to even notice she's pregnant within a week of conception. Something felt off, and I knew I needed answers. Now, going through someone's personal things is a line neither of us ever wanted to cross. But in this situation, when I believed she was lying to me about the paternity of the child I was so desperate to have, I justified it. I logged into her laptop while she was out and found a flood of messages between her and our neighbor on her social media. Every suspicion I had about the two of them was spot on. They had been sleeping together for months. From the messages, it was clear that the baby was his. He didn't want anything to do with it and was worried that if their affair came out, it would destroy his life. They both agreed to pass the baby off as mine. I can't even begin to describe how heartbreaking it was to have this confirmed. Having a child had been my #1 priority, and I had been so happy that it was finally happening. But all of that was ripped away from me. I wasn't about to let them get away with it. They weren't going to ruin my life and then pretend like nothing had happened. Over the next few weeks, I started distancing myself from my wife. I was in the process of hiring a divorce attorney and preparing the papers so I could surprise her with them. We were throwing a baby shower so everyone could come over, bring gifts, and celebrate the upcoming arrival. Friends and family gathered at our home for the event, and it felt like the perfect moment to call them both out for their betrayal. Before we opened presents or cut the cake, I stood up next to my wife and told everyone I had something to say. Everyone turned to me, likely expecting me to say something sweet about how excited I was to become a father and how much I loved my wife. Instead, I congratulated my wife and the real father on their baby. The room was filled with confusion, so I clarified, letting everyone, including my wife, know that I was fully aware the baby wasn't mine. The shock and disgust on their faces said it all. It takes a special kind of person to try to pass off a baby as someone else's. Once I finished speaking, I handed her the divorce papers and told her I'd be leaving the house and would have nothing to do with her or the baby. Our neighbor's wife was livid, dragging him outside to give him a piece of her mind. As it turned out, he had a position at her father's company and was in line for a big promotion, as her father was planning to retire. It was a family-owned business, and her dad wanted to keep everything in the family. But that promotion never happened, because their marriage didn't survive after all of this came to light. I was able to finalize my divorce, and now I'm much better off without her. I've actually started seeing someone else, and we seem to want the same things in life. It's still early, so I don't know if this will turn into something permanent, but I have a good feeling about her. As for my ex-wife and the neighbor, they tried to make things work for the sake of the baby, but it turns out they only liked each other when they were sneaking around. Neither of them is in a relationship now. My ex ended up moving back in with her mom since she couldn't afford to live in our neighborhood on her own. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. See you next time.